It was supposed to be a medical emergency. When paramedics arrived, they found a young woman unconscious, her body showing clear signs of a miscarriage. She was bleeding, unresponsive, in distress. What happened next was not the quiet, urgent care you'd expect in such a vulnerable moment. It was handcuffs. Within hours, 24-year-old Selena Maria Chandler-Scott went from patient to suspect. The emergency call that should have delivered her to safety instead delivered her into the criminal justice system. She was arrested in Georgia late in the month after first responders were called to treat her. A witness told police they had seen Chandler-Scott place what appeared to be fetal remains into a bag and then into a dumpster. For officers arriving on the scene, that was all they needed to pursue criminal charges. She was taken into custody and charged with 2 serious offenses: concealing the death of another person and abandonment or disposal of a dead body. These were not minor infractions. They carried the weight and tone of felony conduct, as if she had hidden a crime rather than endured a trauma. For most people, hearing about a woman being arrested after a miscarriage is jarring. The image alone is almost too much to process. Someone in physical crisis, possibly in shock, being interrogated, handcuffed and led into the back of a police cruiser. But for Chandler-Scott, this wasn't hypothetical. This was real life. And within days, her story would become national news. The case spread rapidly across news outlets and social media, not just because of what happened, but because of what it represented. Chandler-Scott's arrest tapped into something larger, the fear many have felt since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Without constitutional protection for abortion rights, the rules have changed dramatically in many states, and for some it feels as if pregnancy itself can now be grounds for suspicion. In Georgia, where Chandler-Scott was arrested, a new post-Roe legal framework has emerged. The state enacted an abortion ban that includes language suggesting fetuses have legal personhood. That phrase, fetal personhood, is more than just a legal term. It's an entire worldview, one that says embryos and fetuses should be treated like full legal citizens, with rights that can in some cases compete with or override the rights of the pregnant person. But what does that look like in practice? For Selena Maria Chandler-Scott, it meant that losing a pregnancy triggered a police investigation. It meant that how she responded, possibly in confusion, grief or panic, was examined not as a medical moment, but as a potential crime. The normal, heartbreaking messiness of a miscarriage was suddenly transformed into a legal liability. To be clear, Chandler-Scott was not accused of causing the miscarriage. The focus wasn't on whether she terminated the pregnancy, but on what she did after the loss occurred. And yet the public reaction was swift and emotional. For supporters of reproductive rights, this wasn't just about one arrest. It was about the potential consequences of treating miscarriage, a common and painful medical event, as something criminal. According to public data, miscarriage occurs in roughly 10 to 20% of known pregnancies. For those who experience it, the process can vary dramatically. Some women miscarry at home, others in hospitals. There is no single correct response, and often no clear guidance on how to manage fetal remains, particularly early in pregnancy. In many cases, doctors provide only general instructions: rest, hydrate, return if symptoms worsen. Rarely do they give legal advice. What was missing was empathy, or at least the assumption that this might be a health crisis before it's treated as a criminal investigation. Chandler-Scott's age added to the public's concern. At just 24, she stood at the threshold of adult life. Not a minor, not yet deeply established in the world. And the very moment when she most needed support became the moment she was isolated, branded, and shackled. Her experience turned into a cautionary tale, a warning to others about how fragile the boundary is between private loss and public scrutiny. In the official police statement, the language was clinical. There was no mention of her physical condition, no reference to emotional distress, only a recitation of the witness account and the resulting charges. But what the statement lacked was exactly what advocates began shouting about: context. Miscarriage is not just a biological event, it's an emotional storm. What someone does in those hours and minutes is shaped by pain, fear, confusion, and cultural silence. Too often women are left to navigate this alone. There are few, if any, instructions for what to do when a pregnancy ends unexpectedly. Do you call 911, go to an ER, stay at home and let the body take its course? Should you bury fetal remains? Save them? Most women don't know, and there's no public education around it. So when the law steps in after the fact without clarity, the result can feel cruel and random. In the weeks after her arrest, Chandler-Scott's case began to draw comparisons to others across the country, part of a growing pattern of pregnant women being policed and punished for outcomes often beyond their control. It raised a painful but urgent question. If a woman can't safely seek help during a miscarriage without the threat of criminal charges, what kind of society have we become? For now, Selena's story is just beginning. The legal process has shifted in her favor, but the emotional and reputational damage has already been done. In those early days when all she needed was care, what she received instead was suspicion, surveillance and shame. The moment the news surfaced, responses surged across the country. It wasn't just another headline, it ignited a flashpoint. People who had never heard of Selena Maria Chandler-Scott found themselves caught in the emotional current of her story. It resonated far beyond Georgia, far beyond a single case, because it symbolized something more alarming, a growing fear that the legal system no longer distinguishes between medical tragedy and criminal intent. Advocates, legal experts, medical professionals and everyday citizens weighed in almost immediately. Some were stunned, others enraged. Many expressed sorrow, but underneath all the reactions was a common thread: uncertainty. What had once been a private medical matter now felt exposed, vulnerable to interpretation by prosecutors, police and the public. For women who had experienced loss and for those working in maternal care, the implications were chilling. The online reaction was swift. Hashtags trended, comment threads exploded, organizations dedicated to reproductive justice issued urgent statements. Many pointed out that Chandler-Scott's arrest appeared to cross an invisible line. It was no longer about what she had done, but about how her situation was being defined, and more people began asking, are we criminalizing pain? The backdrop to this was unmistakable. Since the rollback of constitutional protections following the Supreme Court's 2022 decision to dismantle Roe v. Wade, the landscape had become unstable. Where once there had been federal limits on how states could regulate reproductive care, there was now a patchwork of laws and enforcement strategies. In some places, prosecutors were interpreting miscarriages through a lens shaped more by politics than medical science. This case, though unprecedented in Georgia, wasn't isolated. It evoked comparisons to other moments in recent history where pregnancy outcomes were scrutinized in courtrooms. In fact, advocates pointed to the increasing frequency of cases where people faced legal trouble simply for what happened to their bodies. Some saw it as the inevitable result of a broader shift, where policies aimed at restricting abortion were now being used to question the choices and behavior of pregnant individuals at every stage. A headline doesn't always convey nuance, but the tone of coverage this time reflected genuine unease. National publications didn't merely report what had occurred, they examined the larger implications. Interviews with legal scholars suggested that this incident had the potential to test the limits of what post-Roe enforcement would look like. And reproductive rights groups quickly underscored a point they'd been raising for months. Laws that claim to protect life can end up criminalizing those who need compassion most. One powerful statement came from a reproductive justice organization that tracks how pregnancies are treated under criminal law. Their leadership emphasized how emotionally and legally dangerous it is to treat someone experiencing a miscarriage as if they've done something wrong. They also reminded the public that medical providers often advise patients to allow miscarriages to occur naturally at home, meaning many people handle fetal remains alone without clear instructions or guidance. These facts didn't just stir debate, they struck a nerve. In social media spaces, women who had miscarried began sharing their own experiences. Some told of waking up in pools of blood, afraid and alone. Others remembered confusion over what to do with fetal tissue. Many described the silence they encountered, how no one had ever explained what to expect or how to respond when it happened. What united their stories was the realization that any one of them under slightly different circumstances could have faced similar scrutiny. Doctors and nurses also began to speak out. Many expressed concern that their roles were shifting from caretakers to potential witnesses. With the legal system more entangled in reproductive health, clinicians felt caught between providing humane care and avoiding legal missteps. There was worry that pregnant patients might be afraid to seek medical help for fear of investigation, that the doctor-patient relationship was at risk of erosion under the pressure of surveillance. One particular voice from a legal expert with years of experience in reproductive law laid out the broader concern. She explained that this wasn't just about the arrest of one woman. It was about the new precedent being quietly set, one where subjective interpretations of behavior during a health crisis could lead to life-altering legal consequences. If carelessness or confusion during a personal emergency could result in charges, then no one could feel safe. She added that the law is often slow to adjust to medical reality. In the absence of clarity, enforcement tends to rely on perception, and in cases involving pregnancy, perception is often steeped in morality, cultural bias, and political pressure. What that means in practice is that women are being left exposed, not only to physical harm, but also to reputational and emotional damage. Even among those who did not take a strong political stance, the story struck a deep chord. There was something undeniably human about it. A young woman in crisis, faced with a moment that no one prepares for, now faced legal action because her decisions in that moment didn't fit an expected script. What added to the tension was that much of the public didn't even know what the legal expectations were. If someone loses a pregnancy at home, what exactly are they supposed to do? Are there state-sanctioned guidelines for managing remains? Is there legal language that distinguishes between handling a loss and committing a crime? In most jurisdictions, the answer is no. That ambiguity opens the door to interpretation, and as this case revealed, potentially devastating consequences. The response wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. Reproductive rights advocates immediately began using Chandler-Scott's story to push for clearer protections. They argued that, without specific safeguards in place, pregnant people would remain vulnerable to prosecution, especially in states where fetal personhood laws blur the line between motherhood and criminal liability. It also became clear that Chandler-Scott's arrest was not just an incident, it was a signal. It highlighted how the legal system in a post-Roe world is grappling with the power it now holds over pregnancy-related matters, and in that struggle, people like Chandler-Scott become collateral damage. Even after the charges were dropped, the outrage did not subside. The fact that it took national attention, legal analysis, and advocacy pressure to push back against the prosecution revealed how fragile justice can be in these situations. For many, it reinforced a sobering truth. In the absence of robust protections, the fallout from a medical emergency can include public shaming, legal trauma, and the lasting scar of arrest. When the district attorney finally addressed the public, his tone was measured. Patrick Warren, Tift County's top prosecutor, announced that the charges against Selena Maria Chandler-Scott were being dropped. After thorough examination of the facts and the law, he said, continuing prosecution is not legally sustainable and not in the interest of justice. It was a statement crafted for clarity, but behind its clinical phrasing lay a deeply emotional outcome. Legally, it was the right decision. A medical examiner had determined that the fetus was approximately 19 weeks and non-viable at the time of miscarriage. There were no signs of foul play or trauma, no suggestion that the fetus had ever taken a breath or shown life outside the womb. In the language of Georgia law, the fetus did not meet the threshold of personhood that might warrant further investigation or support criminal prosecution. Still, the dismissal of charges didn't erase what had happened. Chandler-Scott had already been through an ordeal, arrested, booked, publicly named and made into a symbol for a national debate. For her, the trauma didn't end when the case was dropped. In many ways, that moment merely added a footnote to a story she hadn't chosen to be part of. The headlines might shift, but reputational damage and emotional scarring don't vanish with a press release. It was clear that law enforcement had acted on what they believed to be necessary at the time. But it was also clear that the system wasn't equipped to handle such a delicate situation. While law enforcement acted in good faith, Warren noted, it's now clear that no criminal law was violated. That distinction matters. Good faith doesn't mean good outcome. The law might not have been broken, but trust certainly was. The case had turned the spotlight toward a grey area few had fully examined before. What happens when pregnancy loss meets criminal suspicion? For many, this legal reversal was a relief, but also a warning. How many others might go through similar experiences before the law catches up with lived reality? Advocates welcomed the decision but remain critical of the system's inability to prevent harm in the first place. One representative from Pregnancy Justice, the organization monitoring pregnancy-related criminalization, described the dropped charges as the only logical decision here. Yet she also noted that the trauma couldn't be undone. No one is taught how to handle fetal remains, she said. Police and prosecutors should not be weighing in on how women in this situation respond. Chandler-Scott's case had opened a window into a world where grief, confusion, and biology are treated with criminal suspicion. Though justice prevailed, the system's instinct to punish rather than protect had already run its course. At the center of this story lies a deeper legal and philosophical shift, the idea of fetal personhood. This doctrine, which assigns full legal rights to embryos and fetuses, has gained traction in recent years, especially in states like Georgia. Though it may sound abstract, its implications are not. When laws treat a fetus as a legal person, every action or inaction by the pregnant person becomes a potential subject of legal scrutiny. Georgia's abortion ban, enacted after Roe was overturned, includes language that bolsters this perspective. It positions the fetus not merely as potential life, but as life already protected under law. While the intent behind such policies is to preserve life, the consequence is often the erosion of privacy and autonomy for the pregnant individual. Selena Chandler-Scott's case wasn't about an illegal abortion. It wasn't about violence or neglect. It was about how she handled a miscarriage, something that affects countless people. Yet, the mere presence of fetal remains in a dumpster was enough to invite felony charges. Why? Because under the lens of fetal personhood, any post-miscarriage action can be interpreted as mishandling another person. This is not theoretical. Between 1973 and 2022, over 1,800 people in the United States faced criminal penalties connected to pregnancy, according to research by Pregnancy Justice. While most were not about handling remains, a notable 2% involved charges related to corpse tampering or similar accusations. These cases may seem rare, but they're growing, and they often rely on vague statutes, outdated interpretations, and an expanding definition of harm. What fetal personhood does in practice is shift the legal balance. Rather than focusing on whether someone intended harm, it treats any deviation from expectation as possible wrongdoing. Did someone delay seeking medical care? Did they dispose of tissue in a way deemed improper? Did they fail to notify authorities? Under fetal personhood, these become potential infractions. For doctors and healthcare providers, the risks are growing as well. Many are now unsure how much they can advise patients without risking liability. In some states, physicians avoid offering full guidance on miscarriage management, fearing that detailed advice could later be used against them or their patients. This silence leads to confusion, and confusion becomes the space where criminalization thrives. The tragedy is that there are no universal standards for how to handle fetal remains. Even among medical professionals, the guidance is inconsistent. Patients are often told that passing tissue at home is common, and no further action is required unless there's heavy bleeding or infection. In a different context, Selena's actions might not have drawn a second glance, but in a state with strict personhood laws and heightened political pressure, they triggered a felony response. The legal framework is clear in one direction and murky in another. Fetuses are increasingly granted rights, but those carrying them are left in uncertainty. As this doctrine grows, the risks to pregnant people multiply, not just in terms of legal consequences, but in how they are perceived, treated, and judged. Selena Chandler-Scott's case may be legally closed, but its impact is far from over. For many, it represents a warning, a sign of what could become common if the current trajectory of pregnancy-related criminalization continues. Her arrest did not occur in a vacuum. It was shaped by recent political shifts, cultural divisions, and a legal system struggling to adapt to a post-Roe reality. Across the country, people are wondering, what happens the next time a miscarriage is misunderstood? What happens if a scared teenager makes the wrong phone call? What if a doctor hesitates and someone suffers as a result? These questions are not speculative. They are forming the new contours of reproductive health in America. The gap between lived experience and legal interpretation is widening. People facing pregnancy loss are often doing so without support, without knowledge, and now, more dangerously, without protection. In states with aggressive laws, a tragic event can quickly spiral into a legal ordeal, and not every district attorney will choose the path of compassion. This story also speaks to the urgent need for better public education. Most people don't understand how miscarriages are managed. There are no state-issued brochures, no helplines for what to do if you lose a pregnancy outside of a hospital. In that absence, people rely on instinct, on whatever vague advice they recall. And if the law decides that instinct is incorrect, the consequences can be life-altering. Advocacy groups are now pushing for specific legal protections that clarify what is and isn't a crime. They argue that criminal law should never be the first response to a health emergency. Instead, they call for policies that center compassion, not punishment, that see miscarriage as a time for care, not suspicion. Selena's case may help advance that cause. It could become a precedent not for prosecution, but for restraint, for choosing not to escalate a tragedy into an accusation. But whether that happens depends on how the public, lawmakers, and courts respond. In the end, this story is not just about law or politics. It's about dignity, about the right to grieve, to suffer, to survive, without being made a suspect. If America cannot guarantee that, then we are no longer protecting life. We are only punishing those who carry it. If this story made you think or broke your heart, please don't scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe so more people hear the truth about what's happening across the country. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters.